Good afternoon and welcome to the National Gallery of Art. My name is Grace Murray. I'm the head of public programs here at the gallery, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's esteemed guest speaker, filmmaker and activist Meera Nair, as this year's annual Rajiv Vaidya Memorial Lecturer. But before I do that, I'd like to thank the entire Vaidya family, including Dr. Shailendra Vaidya, for being here in person today, and they are sitting here in the front row, to celebrate the legacy of the late Rajiv Vaidya. This is the 24th iteration of the lecture series which the Vaidya family has endowed, and we at the National Gallery want to extend a very grateful thank you to the family for your generosity in the name of Rajiv, who was an ardent, yes. Rajiv was an ardent film lover and a visitor to our film programs here at the gallery. So this year's guest, Meera Nair, joins us to deliver a lecture entitled India and the World, East, West, and Coming Full Circle. After her talk, she has generously offered to answer a few questions. So if you have a burning question you would like to ask, we do have mics on either side of the auditorium following her talk. And after a little bit of a conversation, I hope you will stay to experience a special screening of Meera's narrative feature film debut, Salaam Bombay, which won the Camera d'Or and was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film in 1988. Many other independent feature films followed Salaam Bombay, including Mississippi Masala in 1991, the Golden Globe and Emmy-winning Hysterical Blindness in 2001, and the international hit Monsoon Wedding, released in 2001, for which Meera was the first woman to win Venice Film Festival's coveted Golden Lion. She has also produced and directed a number of series for television, including an adaptation of Vikram Seth's novel, A Suitable Boy, and Mohsin Hamed's The Reluctant Fundamentalist. A longtime activist, in 1998, Nair used the profits from Salaam Bombay to create Salaam Balak Trust, which works with street children in India. In 2005, she established Maisha Film Lab in Kampala, Uganda, a nonprofit training initiative for emerging East African filmmakers. So now we will watch a short roll of some highlights, film highlights from Meera's career, and then I hope you will please join me in welcoming Meera Nair.
I'm a black man born and raised in Mississippi. Ain't a damn thing you can tell me about struggle.
What do you know about...
I know that you and your daughter ain't but a few shades from this right here. That I know.
Now you get out of that goddamn bed and you fly that plane to Ireland, or I swear to you, I will.
कपड़ा मत खराब कर चल
बाबा एक चांस दे मेरे को
बस मत चल
साला बड़वा
Give them some privacy, na? You know, I met CL only once and we got married for
You don't tell me.
Can we be civil, Jim?
You think you're the only person who's experienced injustice firsthand?
I have a commitment to myself.
Not at all. You remind me of everything that followed.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Shukriya, namaskar, salam. It's such a pleasure to be here at the National Gallery of Art, and I really am honored. Thank you, Shailendra Vaidya and the great Vaidya family, to ask me to do this in honor of their son, Rajiv Vaidya, who left us 25 years ago, and he loved movies and he wanted to become a filmmaker. So, Rajiv, this is for you. A journey to share about the trials and struggles and sometimes the joys like this one, to have an audience here that is so keen to see the work. It's one of the great joys of communicating, is the great joys of filmmaking. So thank you for being here. If we don't tell our own stories, no one else will. The idea of telling one's story in cinema is what has shaped my life. I believe there is nothing more extraordinary than life itself, that the truth of life is inevitably more powerful and peculiar than fiction. Somehow, despite my work and my stories being unusual to the world, be it a film about street children in Bombay or about an interracial couple, I always have done what has called out to me. After all these years, I'm thankful that I followed my passion and let it guide me. And this is the advice and this is the letter I want to send to Rajiv and all others like us, like him, which is to tell the stories really you want to tell, to arm yourself with craft and rigor, and to build and cherish a creative community with you, because life isn't limitless and we have not long to love. I came to making movies by this study of life in a form called cinema verité, which means the cinema of truth, the cinema of how to observe life in all its beauty, complexity, and contradiction. Can art change the world, was my idealistic question. And after a stint in political street theatre in Calcutta and several years working as an actor on stage in Delhi, I stumbled into film in school when I came here to be an undergraduate at Harvard in 1976. I asked myself, was it possible to effect change by showing visually the truths of the world we live? From 1980 onwards, I made 5 documentaries over the course of 7 years, each exploring questions in India, questions that got under my skin and refused to let me go. My teachers were Ricky Leacock and D.A. Pennebaker, 2 great sort of gurus of the handheld camera. They invented pretty much the mobile camera, and it was through their tutelage initially that gave me the courage to go into these worlds that I knew and observed but had not really been a part of. My first film, So Far From India, I explored the borders between countries and people and how one moves in between. And then the second film was India Cabaret, where I questioned the line dividing good women from bad women, the archetypes of saint and whore and mother that we are given or made to play. I explored the double lives of cabaret dancers in Bombay, their, quote, normal worlds by day in which they worked as mothers or ayahs or sisters or ordinary working women, and their, quote, polluted world by night when they became Raat Ki Ranis or queens of the night, a euphemism for dancing girls in a club. Why was I there? I wanted to tell a story that would go beyond the stereotypes in my society of so-called respectable women and so-called immoral women. What makes a woman be considered one or the other? What are these distinctions and in whose interests are they perpetuated? Are their values and beliefs totally different from each other? We filmed a male customer, Mr. Pujara, a regular at the club and a delighted connoisseur of the cabaret form. And thank goodness alcohol was my best friend in this club, because they were always slightly tipsy and they never knew what they were getting into when they said yes, that I could come back to their own homes with them. And then I followed him home to film his traditional and good-humored wife amidst his large extended family. So India Cabaret became this eternal triangle, Indian style: a respectable wife, the husband, and the fallen women. A story that may have been told over and over again, but I hoped to tell it in a way particular to me as an Indian woman. It was while making India Cabaret in the city of Bombay that I found inspiration to make Salaam Bombay. Living in Antop Hill, which the girls would call Antoffi, it was only 2 months into living in Antoffi with them that I understood that Antop Hill was actually Antoffi. With the dancers as I did, I was assumed to be one of them, which was the most critical way, really, of understanding what their lives and the double standards that affect their lives could be when you yourself are being seen as a stripper by the neighbors. In the mornings, there was a great role reversal in their homes. The ladies, Rekha and Rosie, with whom I lived, the dancers, would ask the chai pao, or a tea boy, to wake them up with hot tea. And just for fun, the girls would treat the boys like the men treated them the night before and ask them to dance. They would say, nacho, like an Indian movie villain. And street kids, and the little boy would serve them hot tea and he would dance and sing pathetically, I am a disco dancer. It's a scene in India Cabaret. And in this world, street kids roamed everywhere. And there was an image I saw which became the catalyst to make Salaam Bombay, which was a young man who only had a torso and a head and no legs at all on a makeshift platform that he had made himself with rubber wheels. And one day at a traffic light, I saw a very gnarled hand holding the window of my taxi. And I looked down and there was this young man, and I was terrified for him. The lights were red, and as soon as they turned green, what would happen to him? When they turned green, he took the momentum of the taxi cab, held on to it, and then left it and pirouetted, and salaamed the audience, which hardly looked at him, and he just felt like he was the Queen of England at that moment. And I just was struck by this. I decided, I felt so struck by the flamboyance of how he wanted to live and how he had no self-pity about his own condition. And after making so many years of documentaries, my own family did not see documentaries, because at that time, all the documentaries in the 80s in India were about how much coal the government made and, terrific things for addressing insomnia. You would go to sleep the minute you saw one. And I just, I just decided that I had to make a film that could get audiences, that I wanted more control over the light, the story, the gesture. And that's why I ventured into fiction storytelling, armed with the same interest of a love for life. Salaam Bombay has been called a period film for many years. When we made it, Bombay was still just one long, skinny road. There was no Sea-Link, no high-rises, no Antilla, which is the hotel-like structure that one family has made for itself, and they don't even live there. It was none of that, no easy linkage, except for the trains that linked the city. The underbelly that we describe in Salaam Bombay is actual. It is actually the red light area where we shot, the brothels. This is in a brothel, this shot, for instance, and it did not have this fuchsia wall. But I saw this fuchsia wall in another brothel next door, and I wanted it. So instead of, I addressed the union of madams, the women who really run the brothels. They said, oh, a woman like us, come on in. They were incredibly supportive. So Kamathipura, the red light area of Bombay, became actually my studio of making Salaam Bombay. And instead of and I would just paint it fuchsia like I wanted to from the other brothel I liked. I would, we had very little money, but we had vantage points that we had already sussed out, where we could see all of Kamatipura, and we wanted rain for a very big scene in the film, but we had no money for rain machines, so we always had a plan A and a plan B, where if it would start raining, we would drop everything and go to the one vantage point and put Chai Pao down there, the tea boy, and say action, and he would then travel in the rain. You'll see it in a minute. But this time when it started raining, we had to rush to that brothel for that vantage point, and this time in that room there was a lot of servicing going on, like 3 sets of customers, and there were little dingy curtains that separated them, and and the madame was sanguine. She said, "Oh, you got your spot, you carry on," and I literally had to climb over 3 sets, actually there were now 6 sets of legs, on them, and hand the camera to my very diminutive, also female cinematographer, Sandy Sissel, and she got there, and I was right there, and we put Chai Pao down on the street below, and I said action, and maybe there was a lot of more action behind me, but that was really how we shot this film. It was plan A and plan B. And I remember when Steven Spielberg saw this film, it was nominated for the Academy and so on. He said to me, "What was your budget, Meera?" There was like 15 million, because that last shot, which was about the Ganpati, the climax of the film is a celebration of the Ganesh, the elephant god who helps us in every way. And it's millions of people on the street to take the statues to the immersion, and the climax of the film was shot. We put in our actors within this huge scene, and we filmed it. And I remember Spielberg asking me if I had $15 million, for this shot, and I said no. I had exactly $860,000 for the whole film. But that was the beauty of really combining cinema verite, what was really going on with our own fiction storytelling. There was no model before that which even allowed me to imagine success with the audience in America. Spike Lee and I are good friends, and we used to share the same editing room in New York to save money. 12 hours him, 12 hours me. We would battle over who did the night shift, and often it was him, I must say. He was finishing She's Gotta Have It, which became a big success, the first sort of black independent film. And I had these examples of successes around me in New York, but I never thought ever that an Indian film made in Hindi, made in actually a kind of street patois of Bombay, about street kids, could even go down any route of success. But there is a simple line in the Bhagavad Gita, which is, beware the fruits of action. Don't tangle with the rewards of your action before you fully bear fruit of the action. Do what you're doing fully and completely, and only then it could guide you. And I often think that action is contaminated by ambition. And I went into making Salaam Bombay with that simple attitude, to tell the story of the children, to raise the money for it, to make it to the best of your ability. Do not make it feel like homework and like you're preaching to the people, and to make it to the best, like it's the first and the last day of your life. Salaam Bombay won the Camera d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, which is the prize for the best first feature. And the best part of that prize was it came with $50,000, and I had a debt of exactly $48,000. So I cleared my debt, which was really a wonderful feeling. And it allowed me to pay that off, and it gave me the freedom to make films which mattered to me, which only I could make. The aftermath of that film gave me the energy to believe that we could make a difference. A major film that had influenced me to have the courage of making Salaam Bombay was Hector Babenco's great Brazilian film, Pichote, about a street kid. And I had seen this film, and I was so taken by it. And anyway, went on to make my own film, and it was really uncanny that the day I began shooting Salaam Bombay in Bombay, I opened the Times of India, and on the cover of the Times of India was that Pichote, the young child who had played Peixoto had been killed in Brazil. And I just, vowed that this could not happen to our children. And in the process of making Salam Bombay and researching it, I saw what was actually not ever available to street kids in the form of foundations or help or trust or centers or anything that honored them as children. They were little places that would clean them up and give them a meal and put them back out, but nothing that honored them as kids who belonged, who had a life. And that's why we established that, in the first day of shooting Salam Bombay, I wanted to make a Salam Balak Trust, which we did establish with the success of the film and so the monies that we received. And now I have to tell you with great pride, and not really just me, it's my mother, who is a social worker, who is the chairperson of Salam Balak Trust, and now we have close to 187 social workers and staff who run our institution, Salam Balak Trust, that we now serve more than 17,000 children a year in Delhi and in Bombay, across the world. And in fact, when Danny Boyle was many years later making, what was that film? Oh no, Slumdog Millionaire. Slumdog Millionaire. He asked me, what should he do with the street kids and all of this? And I said, it is so hard to do what we did, but you should just come, you should just become a part of this, because it's very hard to start these wheels in motion. Sadly, it didn't work that way for that film and his children, but it really is something extraordinary that the kids who come through Salam Balak Trust, we heavily emphasize the arts, the screenplay writing, the musical making. They are now such professionals across India, and also have a very coveted event annually every year in Delhi and in Bombay, where the kids themselves write and perform their own stories in a very, very beautiful way on stage. After Salam Bombay, I had suddenly a lot of attention, a lot of agents, some offers, but I turned it all down because I had an idea about making a film about being a brown person between black and white. What I thought of at that time as the hierarchy of color, it was another type of story that was unheard of, but one that I knew I had to tell. When I first went to America for university, I noticed the levels of difference between black people and Indians and other people of color, and the solidarity, strangely, sometimes between them. Growing up in India, it is so apparent, the consciousness we have of degrees of color within our own communities. So coming from that and witnessing it in an American context, I was intrigued. The Asian expulsion in Uganda by Idi Amin provided the hook to this story. In 1972, Idi Amin expelled all Asians from Uganda, several generations at one time, and Indians who had thought of Africa really and Uganda as their home were suddenly asked to leave, but they had lived a life generally quite separate from local African society, and had been turned upon and asked to leave. So what happens to them then? What is home for them? It seemed to me that there was one point in history where this kind of tension between black and brown had crystallized. I also read, there used to be a wonderful rag and paper called India Abroad, which told us about the diaspora in this country. And I had read in those papers about the Ugandan Indian exiles who came to dirt-poor Mississippi and bought motels there, especially in the Deep South. Again, it was intriguing to me that this was where they ended up owning them, in the South, which is, of course, known for both its segregation and for the birth of the civil rights movement. Once again, just as in Uganda, Indians were in the middle of black and white. So I put the realities together. What would happen if one person from the Indian community crossed the border of color into another, into the black one? The story of Mississippi Masala is an interracial love, which when discovered is explosive. The love story brings back memories of the exodus from Uganda. I brought this idea to my old friend Suni Tarapurwala, who had written the screenplay for Salam Bombay, and she really made it come alive. It's very irreverent, a kind of comedy about exile and race, and it's a mischievous film. While holding a mirror to all sorts of racism within us, we managed to pack in a lot of fun. It's also the time I pursued this. I had read a very evocative, brilliant book called From Citizen to Refugee about being expelled from Uganda. And that was written by a young man, Mahmoud Mamdani, whom I then interviewed and met in Kampala. And I'm happy to say that we are been together now 35 years, and he's my royalty for making this film. And he's here today. So Mississippi Masala became a film about a city of crossings, of people crossing land and cultures, of deracination for African Americans as well as for South Asians. What is astonishing is that while they are different, the similarity of how an Indian family lives and how a black family in the South lives is, in terms of the community and family and religion, are strangely and remarkably similar. To see ourselves in each other, not just to see ourselves as the other. As I pushed forward with really no example or guru, I didn't know if I could find ever an audience to meet me on the other side of my work. The feeling of being neither here nor there, it's called Dhobi ka kutta. There's a nice saying in Hindi. Sometimes the Hindi is better than much else. Dhobi ka kutta na ghar ka na ghat ka. It means the washerman's dog. He's neither of the street nor of home, but is sort of at home everywhere. He's a novelty and a foreigner abroad. It was hard to shake off this feeling in myself, to be a novelty at home and to be a foreigner abroad. But when Mississippi Masala opened in London, in New York, and really all over the globe, I remember looking at the queues of people lining up the block to see it. I was bewildered and delighted not only at the sheer number, but also the color. The lines of people flashing their hybridity and emanating their pride of hybridity. And it was then I discovered that there are people who are listening. There is actually nothing more powerful than making work in which we see ourselves, our color, our language, our poetry, to make work that brims with specificity and plumbs something relatable in each one of us. My film, Monsoon Wedding, came out of a challenge I gave myself to make something out of nothing. Right before Monsoon Wedding, I returned millions of dollars for a film that I did not think was ready to be made. I was quite depressed, and I made a documentary on laughter and people who take laughing seriously. It's called The Laughing Club of India. And literally, people would think it's a Fellini image, but I was in a highway in front of Haji Ali in Bombay, and we were stuck for a long time, and I looked, and there were about 200 women in white saris holding placards and guffawing as they, madly laughing, as they crossed the street. And I looked up at their placards and it said World Laughter Day. And I thought, I need to laugh. I am just sinking over here. And I literally got off the taxi and followed them and discovered this strange phenomenon called the laughing clubs, where people get together to laugh together, you know. And they invented a form that was very interesting and freewheeling. And I decided to just stop everything and make that film. It became a portrait of the city of Bombay through a montage of old Hindi movie songs, interspersed with 18 people, portraits of people that I would then go home with, who take laughing seriously. And often as you follow people, as you talk to people, they come to want to laugh through a deep feeling of loss. And it is what I thought I was going to make an absurdist film, but it ended up being a very moving film, because their stories of pain that led them to laughter was what became that film. But what happened with the Laughing Club of India is that it gave me the exact style, the monsoon, the structure, the montage, the handheld camera. It became the stylistic genesis of Monsoon Wedding. Wedding, really from that documentary. And I often remember, I often think if I hadn't made that film for no money and with nobody, I would not have made Monsoon Wedding, which turned out to be one of the most successful films I had ever made. I wanted in Monsoon to make an intimate family flick, something out of nothing, a love song to the city of Delhi, where I come from, to return to my old habits of guerrilla filmmaking, except this time fired by the recent empowering of the Danish school of filmmaking called the Dogma method. I wanted to make a film in just 30 days. That was the original premise, to prove to myself that I didn't need the juggernaut of millions of dollars of men in suits in the studios, of special effects, and plenty, of excess to make a good story in the most interesting visual way possible. I wanted to capture, first and foremost, the spirit of masti, which means an intoxication with life, which is inherent in the full-bodied Punjabi community, that's where I come from, aka the party animals of India, to capture the India that I know and love, an India which lives in several centuries at the same time. So such were the fluid pillars of the India I wanted to put on screen. 68 actors, 148 scenes, and one hot monsoon season later, using paintings and jewelry and saris and furniture taken from my home and relatives. My mother actually catered Monsoon Wedding. So when I meet the actors even 20 years later, like Nasiruddin or Kulbhushan Kharbanda, they'll say, हाँ, ठीक था, Monsoon Wedding was nice, but आपकी माँ की भिंडी जो है ना, which means that, making your film was very nice and everything, but your mother's okra, your mother's eggplant, literally they'll drool on it today. After shooting like this, exactly 30 days, a film was born that had a journey so different from any expectation, more correctly, non-expectation. I remember showing it in rough cut to a very uncomplimentary friend of mine, and he looked at it and he said, Meera, this is going to be frighteningly popular. And I didn't believe him, but it did become frighteningly popular. And people from New Delhi to Iceland to Hungary to Brazil to America really believed that it was their wedding, that the Varma's family was their family. And if they didn't have the Varmas in their family, they wanted to be the Varmas. And it was made really for anybody beyond myself. It was made for the people of Delhi, first and foremost, to feel and laugh and cry at our own flawed Punjabi selves. But the secret of Monsoon Wedding, which many people I hold close to asked me to not do, was the secret of sexual abuse within our families. And people told me that, Meera, you can't make a film about masti, about intoxication, about living life large, and have such darkness at the center of it. And I used to sleep those days in the big king bed. I used to sleep on one side, and on the other side of the bed, I had all these index cards of the screenplay, of this scene, that scene, that scene. That's how we work. We put them in index cards. And when my own close circle said, you can't do this, you can't combine this and think it'll work, I removed from the index card map all the sexual abuse, the theme of Ria and her story and her pain, and I looked at the shape of the film, and it just felt like it would be a piece of fluff, And I decided to not listen and make the film that I wanted to make. And that was really what was the power eventually, the extraordinary performance by Shefali Shah, who played the abused niece, the extraordinary performance by really all of them, to really plumb and break open the prison of silence that so many people have suffered with the abuse. And it became a cathartic film, in that sense, because it opened a discussion everywhere. And this was already 24 years ago. So it was not something that is as spoken and as open as it is now. It was really a prison of silence that had been broken. By then, I recognized the power and the privilege of inspiration. And the next chapter of my filmmaking was fueled by grief. I had lost a beloved parent without warning, and as is our custom, we had to bury her the next day in a bitterly cold field under jet-strewn skies. And this was our Amme, who had spent her entire life in the red earth of East Africa, now being laid to rest under the icy glare of snow, very far from what she and we, her family, had known as home. In the weeks of mourning that followed, I found myself on a plane reading Jhumpa Lahiri's book, The Namesake. The book became a comfort, a source of real solace as I tried making sense of the finality of loss. Jhumpa's writing distilled the nature of grief, the loss of a parent in a country that is not fully home, taking readers through a world of crisscrossing, which is achingly familiar to me. The Namesake was many of my worlds, the Calcutta I left behind as a teenager, the Cambridge where I went to college, and the New York where I now live. Jhumpa's New York was not the immigrant communities of Little India or Jackson Heights, but the New York of lofts, of Ivy League bonding, art galleries, political marches, book openings, country weekends in Maine with waspy friends, a deeply cosmopolitan place with its own images and manners. This was the place I had lived in since 1978. This is the city where I learned how to see. Yet, I never felt the pull to shoot a film in New York until I read Jhumpa's beautiful story. William Thackeray writes in Vanity Fair, "The world is a looking glass and gives to every man the reflection of his own face." New York was my looking glass, and in making The Namesake, I could show the world the ease and confidence of the new South Asian cool in the city and how we really lived there, a New York that had not yet made its way to the screen. One of the great advantages in living in 3 continents as I do is that one automatically begins to have an expansive worldview. What is important in one place is absolutely meaningless in another. The aspirations of being a filmmaker in New York City, the studio deals, the Oscar campaigns are quickly put in place when I go home to Kampala, which did not even have movie theaters until a few years ago. This shifting of gears from one reality to another makes me hone my own intuition, to trust the ideas that live in me. When electing to make a film, a filmmaker chooses to inhabit a world in which he or she wants to be immersed. For me, one of the joys of making Mohsin Hamid's wonderful novel, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, was revealing Pakistan in a way that no one ever sees it in the newspapers. With its extraordinary refinement, the searing poetry of Faiz Ahmed Faiz, its heart-stopping Sufi music and ancient culture that is confident in fashion, in painting and music. This world is fluidly juxtaposed in Reluctant Fundamentalist with the energy of New York, the ruthlessness of corporate America, and through our hero Changez's love for the elegant, artistic Erica, it reveals a portrait of Manhattan society at the same exalted level once occupied by Changez's own family back in Lahore. In the bones of Mohsin's tale, I saw a dialogue between one side and the other. And it is this dialogue that embodies my own life story. I came from India to America when I was 19, and like Mohsin, have lived more than half my life outside the subcontinent. Unwittingly, my films, my work, and my life came to be about the seesaw between these worlds, in which I felt both an insider and an outsider. And like many of us who live hybrid lives, I railed against the line that was drawn when Bush coined the axis of evil and built a wall of myopia between one way of life and another. There is one film that has inspired me for decades, the only film in the world I wished I had directed, a path-breaking film that taught me how to show both sides of a conflict with equal intelligence and pain and love. And this is Gilles Pontecorvo's great classic about the fight for Algerian independence, The Battle of Algiers. I had occasion to meet the great man several times in 1991 when, as director of the Venice Film Festival, he invited me to premiere my second film, Mississippi Masala, there. And so it made my heart skip a beat when 2 weeks after finally completing Reluctant Fundamentalist in Bombay, decades later, my phone rang at home, and it was Antonio Barbera, the new director of Venice, exultantly asking me if Reluctant Fundamentalist could open the festival. The honor was great and the pressure was even greater, but of course I said yes, and off we went, a caravan of us, filmmakers from 4 continents, and me secretly praying that the time had come for the Western world to hear of a post-9/11 tale from the other side. As the hot night, August night, descended on the Lido in Venice, I, in my very bad Anarkali special, joined Kate Hudson in her eye-popping mesh metal dress. She was the star of the film, and Mohsin in his Sherwani tuxedo, and Riz Ahmed, it was his first international film before he's become such a big star. Riz was in his rapper duds, and we walked down the red carpet past screaming paparazzi to what I hoped would not be my guillotine. The film played beautifully, punctuated by gasps and tears and laughter, and it always gives me such sweet pleasure to listen to the fullness of our music, the qawwalis, the ghazals, and the tappas on distant shores. I have an 8-minute qawwali sequence that starts the film. And at last, the lights came upon our motley band, and we rose to face a standing audience who just wouldn't stop clapping. And it was only later in the tented banquet by the sea, after copious amounts of champagne and passionate words from another guru of cinema whom I love, Michael Mann, that I began to breathe a bit easier. But in the distance, between the candelabras and the tiara and the gowns, I saw a little diminutive older woman who slowly made her way towards our table, pausing to ask where she could find the director of the film that she had just seen. She came towards me and held both my hands, and then, in a mellifluous Italian accent, she said the most beautiful words that I could have heard. She said, "I am Gilles Pontecorvo's widow, and I have come to tell you that Gilles lives in you." And I still, was kind of amazed by that, and I just want to share that this road of making films is long and full of also struggle. And I have 2 feature films in prep right now. And one of them is Amri, which is on the modernist painter Amrita Shergill. So it really gives me great pleasure to be at the National Gallery of Art to say this, to drop many hints that I should be here in a year from now. Amrita Shergill is an icon that has influenced me in color, in palette, in the bravery of her frame. And I'm really fired by bringing her state of being and her art into this world. She created her own way and lived this wonderful tightrope between East and West. She was born of a Hungarian mother and a Sardar father, and she lived between Hungary and eventually most of her life in Simla in India. And she really looked at Indian, she really created a whole new, she was a pioneer of what we call now the Indian modernist painting. And yet the world does not know her. She died also very young, at the mere age of 28, and was declared a national treasure by Nehru, with whom she had a friendship. And it was her 100 paintings that then became the National Gallery, created the National Gallery of Modern Art in Delhi. And because she's a national treasure, the paintings cannot leave the country, which is why the rest of the world does not know her work as much as they should. And hopefully will know her work soon. Mexico has Frida Kahlo, we have our Amrita, and yet the world does not really know her yet. But women artists, have been unsung for generations. And on her canvases, she told and brought the strength and the grace and the longing of women who till our fields, who long for love, who come from this earth. And I hope to be shooting in the spring next year. And the second film is, is called Bro for the moment. I've always been inspired by Kurosawa's High and Low, which is a searing tale of class and conflict in contemporary Japan. But there is something about the depravity of inequality that's just increasing in our own country, in India. And we've come to a complete reversal, I think, of the socialist India that I was born in. In that India, you never showed what you had. You never showed how much you had. The family, the society was infinitely bigger than you were. But now it has come to an unbelievable place. There's a bullish confidence about money and ostentation to a whole new degree, where skyscrapers, as I said, exist as single-family homes. But this is the world of my next third film, the wealthy, swinging, insane Delhi of today, where the rich have gotten richer and are no longer hidden, and the poor have just increased in number. And the confidence of our society on the one hand, and the disenfranchisement of the other, much larger section of our society, is glaring and fertile ground for a film. I don't look to the market to figure out which stories I should tell. You tell the stories that the market will not tell. You push the boundaries. In 2016, I made an all-black film about a young girl who learns how to play chess in rural Uganda. No, it's not in rural Uganda, it's in Kampala. And she becomes a chess superstar, grandmaster. And it's based on the real-life story of Fiona Mutesi, who became a grandmaster and was called the Queen of Katwe, and that is the name of our film. It's on Disney Plus now. You don't make a Queen of Katwe if you're following the market. You make that film, and the market may, and in this case did catch up. And there maybe is no market right now for a story about a half Hungarian, half Punjabi woman, pioneering painter. But I hope to upturn that next year, because I really believe that there is importance in telling universal stories, but we must also tell our stories our way. I just want to salam the goddesses of beauty and truth. We have to live with both these worlds, and they have to catch up and meet us, because we have not long to love. Thank you so much for this introduction. Thank you.